Our next guest is the Associate Professor and Daniel M. Lyons Chair of History at Brooklyn College in New York City, the author of Defiance of the Patriots, the Boston Tea Party, and the Making of America. Welcome, Professor Benjamin Carp.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for being here.
Yeah, you're welcome. I'm happy to be here.
So your book, you chose to write about the American Revolution using the lens of the Boston Tea Party. What made that a good focal point for you?
Well, the Boston Tea Party is this event that everybody has heard of, but only really know a kind of surface amount about. And there's all these interesting dimensions to it. I mean, one way you can look at it is they have this product, tea, that's from China, that's sold by this monopoly company that is taking over South Asia, right? It's mixed with a product, sugar, that's largely farmed by Afro-Caribbeans. It's only been drunk, tea has only been drunk by Europeans since really 1600, right? And then when they dump it into the harbor, they dress as Native Americans. So here's this kind of global story that's encapsulated in this event that's so important to Boston and the coming of the American Revolution, but it turns out to be all these other dimensions to it too.
Yeah, and that is it's something that you explore a lot in your book, is that, especially here in Boston, it's so often viewed and spoken of as being this very local story, the Boston Tea Party, but it really does have it have so much to do with things that are happening throughout the world at that time.
And the Bostonians were aware of that, right? They read about what was going on in India in their newspapers.
So there are a lot of supposed or causes of the Boston Tea Party. In your book, you talk about, I guess, about 4. What would you say were the main causes of the Tea Party?
Well, if you ask the average person what caused the Boston Tea Party, they say taxes, right? The tax on tea, which had been imposed not in 1773 under the Tea Act, but in 1767, right? And when the Townsend duties, right, put the taxes on tea, and all the other taxes were done away with in 1770, but the tax on tea stays. So yes, no taxation without representation. That's definitely the first cause. However, right, there are other causes too. There's an anti-monopolistic reason for the Boston Tea Party, right? The East India Company is a monopoly company. They are the only company that's within Great Britain and the British Empire that is allowed to transport tea from the Pacific Ocean to England or to the American colonies. There are other European companies that also sell tea, but that's, if Americans are drinking that, they're smuggling, essentially. So, what the Tea Act of 1773 did was made it easier for this monopoly company to be in the Americans' markets selling tea at a low enough price that they'd be able to crowd out all the smugglers. So that was going to hurt Boston smugglers, among other things. So there's the monopoly aspect of this too. Like, it's not just our pockets being picked through taxes, but our pockets being picked by this monopoly company that can then, once they've crowded out all other competitors, can raise prices on this commodity that we all drink to stratospheric levels. So that's the second cause. The third cause is kind of a minor one, but the revenue from the Tea Act, from the tea tax, was then going to be used to pay the salary of the governor and the lieutenant governor and some of the judges and things like that. And so, and those were exactly the people who were empowered to enforce these customs laws that the Bostonians hated so much. So it's like, to them, it's like this perfect system of evil, right? Not only are we paying the taxes, not only are we having to, prop up this monopoly, at our expense, but then the money that we're paying goes into the pockets of the people we hate because they're enforcing these laws that we don't like. So whereas previously those salaries were paid out of vote by the local legislature, which seemed to them to be a lot more constitutionally kosher and fair and all that. So those 3 things together are really bad. And then the other cause, that I found when I was doing this research is peer pressure. Since 1767, once those boycotts get online in 1768, Boston, New York City, Philadelphia, all these big cities had agreed, okay, we're boycotting these products from Great Britain. We're boycotting tea especially. We're not going to allow this legal tea from the hated British East India Company to come in. Everybody stick to that. But then in 1770, it all kind of falls apart. However, New York and Philadelphia, at least, just stop importing British tea. They hold to their boycott, but Boston doesn't. Boston kind of punks out. And so when the Tea Act is passed in 1773, the other cities are like, dude, you guys can't land this tea, or or you're really going to look bad in front of the Sons of Liberty and all the other cities. You just have to prevent this tea from landing. So all the cities had to do this. So in New York, the tea is late, so this doesn't come up until January of 1774. In Philadelphia, they pressured the tea ships to turn around and go back to London, which was technically illegal, but it prevented violence from happening. In Boston, this doesn't work, so violence happens because the Bostonians feel that they have no choice. On the one hand, they don't want to land the tea and pay the taxes on it, but on the other hand, the governor and everybody won't let them send it back. And so the only place for the tea to go is into Boston Harbor.
Yeah, and it's a lot of tea. It's not...
Yeah, it's tons of, it's 46 tons of tea, I think. Yeah, it's a lot.
They say adjusted for inflation, it was like millions of dollars worth of tea, which is crazy to think of that much goods being dumped into the harbor.
Yeah, it'd be worth at least £1 million. I think I figured out that a ton of tea was equivalent to the cost of Paul Revere's house, right? Which, still stands, and we can see it today. So if you think about a house in the north end of Boston and then multiply that by 46 times or whatever the multiplier is, I don't remember now, that that's the level of value of what these faux hawks have just destroyed.
And speaking of the faux hawks, so the Sons of Liberty were dressed as Mohawks when they did this. But from what I understand, these weren't good costumes. They were kind of like Party City version of...
well, it depends, right? So it depends on how much of in the inner circle you were. If you were part of the planning of the Boston Tea Party from the very beginning, you had, look, not a great disguise, but like a somewhat better prepared disguise. If you were invited a little bit ahead of time because they knew you were a trustworthy guy, then you'd have like maybe a kind of Party City version. But some people were just asked, hey, join us, like on the day of. And those people really just had time to kind of throw a blanket around their shoulders and smudge their face. I mean, it's basically an early version of blackface in a way.
Yeah.
So you have varying levels of disguises on the night of December 16th.
Yeah, and the purpose of the disguises were mainly to just so that they wouldn't be recognized. Is that, or is it more symbolic?
I don't think so. I think it's an open secret. Everybody knows who these guys are. Nobody thinks, first of all, nobody thinks it's actual Indians. And second of all, I think, look, it's a town of 16,000 people, fewer than a quarter of which were adult men. So you knew what your cousin, how he carried himself. You knew how your neighbor walked, even if it's dark and even if the guy's face is smudged. I think every spectator knew who these guys were. Some of them were from out of town, but for the most part, most of them I think were in-towners, and everyone knew who they were. But what the disguise is supposed to say, it's supposed to say a lot of things. I think that there's deep symbolic meaning to the Indian disguises, but what the disguise is supposed to say is, you'd better not tell. And it's supposed to make this kind of claim of, oh, it's not really Bostonians who are doing this, it's scapegoated outsiders who are doing this, because I think they knew on some level that Boston was going to be held liable for the property that was destroyed. And so they wanted to at least have this kind of fiction that everybody agrees upon, that these aren't really Boston guys. Right.
I will say though, I've been inside pretty much nonstop for the last year, I guess. And I'm at the old State House in downtown Boston right now. This is the first time I've really left my neighborhood in a really long time. And I will say, being out in Boston with people wearing masks, I was shocked at how many people look like they might be Mark Wahlberg. And I don't think many of them are, but it really, most Bostonians.
There's more than one Wahlberg. So there's
it's true.
There's room there. Yeah.
Thank you for talking with us, Professor Benjamin Carp. His book, Defiance of the Patriots, is available wherever fine books are sold.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks so much.